Okay, we are now on chapter 3 of that hideous strength. And I've mentioned that this is a bit of a slow burn, but that the tension will begin to ratchet up, the pace will begin to quicken. It'll be fairly subtle. I think I've mentioned a couple of times that at some point we're going to stop and say, how did we ever get here? Like it's gotten so far afield. Um, but I think you're starting to see some groundwork laid now for things to begin to take shape. We are still operating in almost two different stories, running parallel with each other, flipping back and forth between two separate protagonists. So, um, we the Mark and Jane are still kind of given their own sections of the chapter. We don't really see much of them with any kind of interaction because they're not interacting at all. They're in separate locations. And so we're going to kind of flip back and forth from them for at least a little while. All the times that I've mentioned Breaking Bad, that as not just as a show, but as a concept, the idea of us drifting away or us drifting towards perdition, towards sin, towards death, that it's often not some big dramatic singular moment, choice, decision. It's often a lot of very small, somewhat inconsequential steps before suddenly we sit and we think, wow, how did I get all the way out here? Um, I've tried to come up with little illustrations here and there. The one that pops in my head today is uh, being out in the ocean, like say on the Atlantic side, and you're just kind of floating in the ocean. And this happens all the time, like when we go to Coco or whatever. Um, we just like, kind of bouncing around and, going up and down the waves, or we're not even particularly deep. We're standing on the sand at the bottom. But if you do that for a while, all of a sudden, if you stop and you look, you're way to the north or to the south of where you started. And like, oh man, how did we? And then you have to start the process of walking back. Like, oh, our towels and stuff are like, man, they're way down there. Which hotel was that? And you have to look for a landmark sometimes because you've gotten so far. And the idea is that the waves aren't coming in perfectly parallel to the shoreline, but it's at a little bit of an angle. And every time that you let the water carry you, and that's one of the nice things, at least for me, to do, is that you let the swell kind of pick you up and set you back down for a second. But every time it does that, it shifts you ever so slightly into the direction that the tide is actually going. And then by the time you actually stop to take stock of where you are, you can be pretty far. There wasn't a moment where a single wave carried you 200 yards to the side. But little by little, almost imperceptibly, you have been carried, nudged, until by the time you actually pay attention, you might be very lost. We have almost two paths with these parallel stories. And maybe they are running parallel, Jane and Mark. But I think already by chapter 3, we're starting to see how those paths are diverging. By the end of chapter 3, at least from Miss Ironwood, we have it laid out. These are two oppositional sides and forces, and you are going to have to choose. Even by not choosing, you're choosing. Unfortunately, this is one of those situations, and sometimes we might find ourselves in that even no choice is a choice. And by saying, well, I'm not going to do anything, we are actually doing something. So their paths are now diverging. We can then start to see these two factions, these two sides, And you can even represent them in the two locations. This kind of giant mansiony facility where all the nice folks are right now, and they're eating and they're drinking and they're staying overnight. And then we've got where Miss Ironwood lives, and this garden that we have to get to it in this large rambling house. And these are going to represent, again, two diverging paths. So the question will be, how far do they go on their two diverging paths, and what do they lead to? And that's what, the successive chapters are going to start little by little, but almost inexorably, like the tide coming in. They will lead to those two very, very different destinations. Okay, so there's definitely some jargony stuff in here, but I'm going to suggest the jargon is a part of it. That is not a bug, it is a feature. There is a special kind of organization that runs on jargon, and that runs on acronyms, and that it runs on making reference to forms and procedures and rules by number or by code. And the more we're around the nice people, the more we should start to see a burgeoning bureaucratic mess. By temperament, I hate meetings. I hate meetings, like just meeting to meet, or some kind of formal, like staff meetings, anything where there's kind of a regularly scheduled come, listen to a report, give a report, we all sit around, we raise our hand, whatever. I just get a little twitchy. Like, I don't like going to diocesan meetings. I always hated school meetings. There's just something about them that feels very artificial to me, and that feels, oppressive is a overblown description, but certain people like meetings. Certain people thrive in meetings. I remember encountering some multiple times. I can pick out various bureaucracies that I've had to deal with, some through schools, some through local governments, some through the church. And it seems that there was a personality and a temperament for the people who were very, very involved within the running of the bureaucratic framework and these meetings. That there were certain people who just kind of gravitated towards that, and they liked it, and they were good at it, and it made a lot of sense. And whatever that distinction was, it wasn't me. Like, that's just, I don't know why you like this, because I don't. And I can't see it. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I think there was a part of those personalities that I think was less than desirable. The sort of person who really liked to be in meetings, some of them were interested in the greater good and trying to work through stuff on behalf of others, and some of them were busybodies with nothing better to do with their time. Am I the only one who thinks that? When I look back at like organizational meetings, wasn't there always the person who, like, okay, we're ready to go. I'd like to, oh, please don't say, and the question was always kind of inane or very superfluous. Like, you didn't really need to ask that. Or I remember these were scouting committee meetings. And the person in charge of this meeting would hand out the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. Now, again, you're talking about volunteer parents. These were the littler kids, the Cub Scouts. And what the committee was in charge of was kind of double checking that everything was okay, and then keeping up the calendar to say, okay, are we in line for this event in 6 weeks? No? Okay. Can you call the place? Can you make sure the den leaders give out the information? And who's going to be in charge of the food? Whatever. There's a little bit of planning and a little bit of calendar coordination. On the agenda, the meeting was scheduled for over 2 hours. And it was laid out in 5-minute increments. Maybe I should have been more grateful to the level of detail that this person engaged in. But I was never thankful because it was like, why are we you know, it felt like we were so bogged down in minutia. And we were spending all sorts of time on things that, why is this a group effort to whether it's talking about something or making these decisions or whatever? The sentiment that this entire meeting could have been an email came up a lot. And I bring this up as just kind of some personal anecdotes, but if you ever get confused in the first 2 sections here, like, I don't really know what that guy was talking about. That's on purpose because these guys are talking about nothing. Have you ever been around someone who says a lot as though they were very important? But if you ever actually knew what they were talking about, they were saying very, very little. It's almost like they had to demonstrate their importance by how much they spoke or how much they referenced. In a bureaucracy, you sometimes begin to value things that people outside of the bureaucracy would not value, but you see them as a way for prominence or for promotion or whatever. Like, you don't want to be lost as a cog in the machine. You want to stand out. Well, how can you stand out? Well, you want to be helpful, but you also want to make sure that you look like you're competent, and you want other people to hear that and to know that you're competent, and that maybe if you can be in charge of something, or maybe if you can direct other people, and then suddenly, hey, I'm working my way up. My job is secure, but I'm also, like, I'm achieving here. I'm moving up and up the ladder. So there's a lot of interactions here that Mark, coming from the outside, and he wants to be on the inside. We've talked about this both times, that this is part of that kind of very human temptation to want to feel included and involved, to feel the lure of the inside group, whatever they might be or whoever they might be. And this starts from childhood on. And it's, in a sense, do we ever really outgrow it? It just looks different. But when we're kids, like the popular kids in school, every school had popular kids, and maybe you were one of them, or maybe you weren't. But the thing about it is, if you weren't one of the popular kids, you wanted to be. There was some kind of draw to it, and maybe you couldn't be, or maybe there was a way to get there, and so you tried. But even if you were in the group, that's what kids don't understand. Like, we get it later. Like, number one, it didn't really mean that much, and number two, they were all terrified of somehow getting out of the group. They looked so confident, or they looked so well put together, but ultimately they were still 13 or 14 years old too, and they were immature and insecure and everything else. When we were teenagers, we likely had a moment where we did something accidental or embarrassing. And it could be anything from slipping and falling to saying something inadvertently foolish to acne to whatever. And we were so worried about what other people were going to say and think. And maybe we got upset, or maybe we felt anxious, or maybe we, went home and was worried about it, or whatever it was. We lacked the context and the perspective when we were younger that we probably got a little bit older, which was everybody was scared and terrified at that age, and they actually weren't paying that much attention to you in the first place. Like all the cool kids or the cheerleaders or the football players or whatever who looked like they had it all together, they were a big ball of anxiety too. Um, so I bring that up, especially in the teenager portion, because Mark is young. He is chronologically young. He's in his early mid 20s, but he is immature. We've met probably people in their 20s that seemed like they were about 12, and people in their 20s who seemed like they were about 40. And he is in that kind of younger framework. So he's looking for acceptance. He's looking for achievement and promotion validity. He's looking for other people to say, you are worthwhile. You are so smart. Boy, we're glad you're here. And so he responds to the initial invitation to come into this because that starts to play into those temptations. Ooh, I'm wanted, I'm desired. They think I am a key component to something important. And that really appeals to his ego. And when he gets there, how is he treated? And he could be alive or dead, and it seems like nobody would actually notice.
Even when he asks a direct question, the guy changes the subject.
Now, we have now met the deputy director, Wither, and I'm going to, is it Wither or Withers? Yeah, it's Wither. So there are some people that we need to pay attention to. Feverstone was one of them. Wither is one of them. Wither has already been announced somewhat subtly as the real power behind NICE, not the public face of it, but the actual shot caller and decision maker. And presumably we've seen a context like that on an organization or in a group or whatever. Sometimes there's the upfront person, but the upfront person is more the face of things, but there's a real decision maker behind them. Maybe somebody that people wouldn't expect. Maybe they're not photogenic, or maybe they're not real outgoing, but they're the real mover and shaker. And so that's what we've met in Wither. And Wither, when Mark actually talks to him, what kind of information does he get out of Wither? Almost nothing. The guy says a lot, and everything is the vaguest of platitudes. And any hint of making a concrete statement or quote unquote getting pinned down, he not just rejects, but he not too unsubtly suggests is wrong and could cause problems. So this is very much a go with the flow or else kind of proposition. Now, poor Mark, who is, kind of following into all of this because he thought this was going to get that validation as well as money, is finding himself slipping deeper and deeper into, I don't know what. He keeps having these moments where he's thinking, what is this actually about anyway? And do I really have a job? There's a very funny and famous sitcom scenario from Seinfeld, 20-something years ago, where George Costanza, the kind of the neurotic character, he gets fired from his job, but the guy who does it is gone, or he's leaving or whatever, and so he was really upset because, oh man, it's such a cushy job, and I have this great bathroom, and all these things are so nice. And the thought occurs to him, well, what if I just show up? Because the firing wasn't super overt. It was a sort of subtle, and it was a little bit, like, well, if you're not going to do this, then maybe you need to go kind of things. So it very much seemed like he was fired, but what if I just show up on Monday and just pretend like nothing ever happened? And so we get to see this kind of crazy scenario play out where he just, like, the brazenness initially shocks the other coworkers, like, didn't that guy get fired? But when he just refuses to act like he was fired, and he just kind of ingratiates himself and starts, it's Karen's birthday and I'll sign the card. And I mean, all this kind of stuff that eventually everybody just kind of shrugs their shoulders like, well, I guess he's here. And they just kind of put up with it. So there's this kind of weird ambiguity that Mark, he has no idea. Wait, was I actually given a job? What is the pay? What are the hours? What are the responsibilities? And every time he starts to kind of sort of bring that up, there's this, well, we can't be pinned down. And kind of the sensible person would realize that by trying to get in too narrow of a box, it could actually cause other troubles. And so his insecurity then makes him shrink back down or say, oh, yes, of course, you're absolutely right. That's what I really meant to say. So he goes from scenario to scenario, feeling kind of like those being in the ocean, being carried by those waves. What have I gotten into? And every time he seems to almost get to a breaking point, almost each time where it's like, you know what? I can't handle this level of ambiguity. This is nonsense. There's some little lifeline given to him. Some person bumps in. Some person says something to him and it pulls him right back in. Oh, you're very important. Oh, we're so glad you're here. Oh, don't listen to those guys who don't know who you are. If the important person knows who, you're actually probably going to be above them at some point. So you're good. You're good. Stay with me. It's a very disconcerting, almost discombobulating atmosphere to find yourself in. I kind of feel sometimes reading these sections like this, these first couple of sections and the last one, people in horror movies who shout out to the screen, no, don't go in there. You almost want it like, there's an axe murder in the woods. Why would you go hide in the dark, spooky attic? We want to yell to Mark, like, just leave. As a matter of fact, he meets a colleague, Bill the Blizzard, who basically tells him, just leave. I'm going to leave. Bill the Blizzard, who we now have gotten a little bit of an interaction with, he was referred to in that first staff meeting, but he wasn't actually there. But he was referred to as someone who might cause trouble. He's apparently maybe like a big personality, or as we found in this chapter, he actually has some notoriety in his field, which Bracton College is not a particularly noteworthy institution. This is not Oxford or Cambridge, though they may act that way. And Bill the Blizzard, even though he seems like somebody they don't really like very much, is one of the few actually recognizable scholars that they have. So they definitely want to keep him around. Well, he's got a pretty strong opinion about nice. And his opinion is not favorable. His opinion is what they're doing is nonsense and it's not worth doing, but you can't stop them. If I were you, I would get out of here and just have this comfortable position at the college, just have your little career and just stick with it like that. And Mark seems to strongly consider it. But even with that opportunity, that door cracked open, he almost resists it overtly a little. Like he almost argues with Bill the Blizzard some. And maybe it's this, again, there's kind of an insecure pride here where Mark doesn't want to admit he's in over his head. And maybe you felt a situation like that before, that at some point you thought you knew what you were doing and you kind of realize a little bit too late that you don't. But actually admitting that, that's maybe too embarrassing or too shameful. So, but maybe if I keep pressing through, I'll figure it out. The cliche illustration is how guys don't like to ask for directions when they're lost. No, I'll figure it out. Like, well, if you just stop and ask for help, yeah, but eventually I will get to something that I recognize, and then why bother? Because then, we'll figure it all out. And that, I kind of feel like poor Mark, even when offered help, almost wants to convince himself and the person offering help how he actually doesn't need help after all. What a strange place to find yourself in, especially moments after you basically internally were asking for help. Now, I've talked about this being two different directions, two different paths. If we're already getting the sense that nice is not the good path, like these are the bad guys, just because someone disagrees with nice doesn't automatically make them one of the good guys. I'm going to suggest that Bill the Blizzard is not really a good guy. Can you think of any? Do you recall anything, any of his interactions that I might be thinking of to say something like that? You can reject wickedness because it's wicked. And I think there is virtue in that, identifying the wrong and saying no. Bill the Blizzard doesn't really do that. Every time they get into some sense of making a choice, he very overtly says he is not making any kind of judgment. Everything, after all, is a matter of taste. And this is simply not to my taste. He makes it almost an aesthetic choice. They're vulgar, not that they're wrong or bad or nefarious or whatever. And I think that is, though a subtle point, is a significant one. We've heard the aphorism about all evil needs to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Well, I'm going to suggest, Bill the Blizzard may not be a bad guy, but just because he doesn't want to have anything to do with nice after he's been around it, his sort of, well, to each his own, isn't going to actually help. And as a matter of fact, I think had he come down more strongly about the problems he had with nice and not just being a matter of personal taste, I don't know, maybe Mark might have taken that lifeline. Be hard to know, but he seems to be the sort of academic that can look at terrible things and simply shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's not for me. Not that it's wrong or bad, because, certainly wouldn't want to use such archaic terminology and a moral framework like a superstition. But, well, it's not to my taste. Well, we're actually starting to meet several people here, some of whom will be more significant or we will see more often within the rest of the narrative. But basically, if anyone is called by name in this section, they're worth paying attention to. And some will come and go, but we've had a few here. We've had, obviously, Wither, who seems to be almost inscrutable. He has those almost empty gray eyes, and he speaks in the vague platitudes where it seems like it's a whole lot of nothing. And the only thing that seems to get an actual rise out of him is Mark suggesting that he might want to know some specifics. Feverstone, we have a little bit of a measure of already, and I have reminded you that he is actually a character from the first book. He is one of the professors who starts this whole thing off by kidnapping the protagonist of the first book, taking him to Mars. Now, Feverstone, or Divine, of the two guys, remember that Divine was the one interested in Mars because of the gold they found. Weston was the one who, as the strict materialist, you basically humanity has to survive, so it must strive and conquer. Divine was the one to um, who wanted to go back and forth to Mars with no interest in humanity or conquering, but he could line his pockets because gold was apparently just everywhere. You could just scoop it up and take it. So both guys represented this sort of amoral, atheistic wickedness, but almost in different directions. Divine seemed the pettier of the two, even though he has ostensibly some kind of nobility in his background and he has academic credentials. He might not be way better than a thief. I'm trying to remember the quote more accurately, and I think this is by somebody like Dwight Moody, some kind of evangelist from the early 20th century, but he was talking about education. And the quote goes something along the lines of, education is not what's going to make a person better. If you don't affect their heart, you are just making a smarter criminal. If you take the boy who is stealing cinders from the railroad track and give him an education and send him back, you will find that he will then steal the entire locomotive. And again, writing from the point of view of an evangelist, he was saying that there is something missing within the human heart that is answered through the gospel and our discipleship. That education is not bad, but for those who don't believe, education is seen as the cure-all panacea solution. Well, you just need an education. If criminals got an education, they wouldn't be criminals. If the poor got an education, they wouldn't be poor. If bad people got an education, they would be better. And while I'm all for education, truly, I am the child of elementary school teachers. I taught, my wife teaches. I've got a graduate degree. I want my children to, pursue as far as they can. Just being taught content doesn't make you a good person. And divine, Feverstone, may be very highly educated and accomplished. Just don't let his educational accomplishments or his titles confuse us with any sense of moral superiority. Because some bad guys are smart. All right, so we've met a few others. We met a couple other people, a couple of sociologists, Steele, somebody else, and they were pretty affronted that aesthetic has been brought in without their say-so. I don't know if you've ever dealt with a bureaucracy that has its own internal set of rules, and if you inadvertently violate those rules, the people in charge of those rules get very upset. Oh, you've done these steps out of order. You have to have the form stamped in this line, not in that line. Get out of the line and go to that line because you've done it wrong. And it almost seems like personal. How dare you try to avoid getting in my line because I'm the one with the authority to let you go any further. But again, what are we seeing in NICE? We know we can feel that these are going to be the bad guys, right? But how are they presented? But like a giant, complicated, super petty, very vague bureaucracy. Has anything overtly evil been done? No. But I think we have that sense. These are the bad guys. We're not sure where it's going. We're not sure what they're doing. But the bureaucratic element, the backbiting, the talking behind each other's backs already, the pettiness, all of this is kind of a part of a whole. As a matter of fact, when we compare it, oh, what's the name of the house? Yeah, I've forgotten. But the house where Miss Ironwood is, it has a name, the little town and house.
St. Anne's?
St. Anne's, thank you. We're juxtaposed here. When we're at St. Anne's, it's a garden. It's a very homey, even though it's a very simple house, very large, not ornate, but everything is very pleasant. Everything seems very natural. Everything seems kind of quiet. And we're already starting to get just like an environmental difference between the two places. One seems like a industrial / governmental bureaucracy, and the other feels like the quiet garden in a country village. And I think that these things are set against each other very much on purpose. That which is natural, that which is homey, that which is quiet and cooperative, versus that which is artificial and vague and petty and backbiting and almost by its definition unnatural. We get a little unnatural in this with the character of Hardcastle. Now, remember that this is written in the early 50s. So having a female, basically head of security / they're not even referred to the head of security. That NICE actually has its own police force, not even like a security department. So that already should have us kind of thinking, what in the world's going on here? So to have a woman in charge of that, I think would be unusual at this time. So that stands out. But even her physical description should start giving us clues that there's something about her that just feels unexpected. Here is a woman who has, very conflicting sort of personal description. She seems built closer to a man than a woman, and yet she's a woman, and she's got a little bit of, makeup and what you might consider sort of a expected dress, but then she also doesn't. And her demeanor and her coarse jokes seem more masculine, but she also does them in a way that seems to overtly try to make Mark uncomfortable as a man and then laugh at it to herself. So we're getting a lot of, like, the pieces don't fit the way we think they ought to fit for some of these people. Almost like, do you expect the head of this ostensibly very complicated, far-reaching, and powerful organization to be this very vague, almost like he's looking past you sort of guy who just speaks in empty platitudes? I mean, a lot of this should just not feel right. In other books, I'm trying to remember the last time this came up. There's a psychological phenomenon which we experience kind of a lot of these days, especially in media with movies and TV, because of their reliance now on a lot of computer effects. The concept of the uncanny valley. So the uncanny valley is a description of why do certain human but non-human images make us feel uneasy. For instance, why do some computer graphics of people look so ridiculous to us in a movie? Like, we can see the bad special effects and it looks terrible. Why do why do we describe finding a doll at night with the eyes that open and close being creepy? Why do representation of like aliens with their faces, where they look vaguely humanoid but not human, make us feel uneasy? The uncanny valley is describing a psychological phenomenon that says when something approaches and gets close to a human image, but it's not there, the closer it gets without meeting it, the worse we feel about it. So anyone remember from like, I don't know, this is also about like 20 years ago, but the Polar Express movie, that was super creepy. They did all motion capture, and they took a very charming, very brief book, and they expanded it out to a whole children's movie. There's a lot of the movie that's perfectly fine, but there was something about the faces, like the technology hadn't quite given them the ability to make the faces more realistic. So it was intended to be very realistic, but also still a little bit off. And the closer they got to realism, the weirder it looked. Now, if it had been a straight cartoon, we would have had no issue with it. And again, it's a psychological principle that as things get closer to human, it makes us uneasy because they're not human. But if they were a little further away, we wouldn't be bothered. If, for instance, you're at night, you wake up from an unsettling dream, and you're, maybe just feeling a little jumpy, and you open the closet, and there's a doll. If it's in the shape of a fuzzy alligator, you think nothing of it. But if it's in the face of like the porcelain doll and the small child, it just doesn't feel right. So that's this principle that, and there's a lot of speculation of why is that the case? Why would we feel so uneasy for things that are, almost human but not? And some of it's like, oh, maybe evolutionary, we were hunted by something, and so we have to, it's like a prey response. I don't know, but it does seem to be a pretty easy to establish response. That when we look at pictures, we can look at a picture of a real person, we can look at a picture of a cartoon. When we look at a picture of some like a photorealistic but slightly off digital version, it's like we're getting all these AI images now online where people have like 10 fingers and stuff, and it's creepy because the computer got it wrong. And even though it looks like it should be a photograph, there's something that our brains somehow subtly pick up, and it makes us feel weird. Everything that we're seeing in this nice mansion or compound, it's like it's getting real close to humanity but missing. And it should make us feel uneasy.
Is that very similar to what you talked about in Revelation 666? Is too close.
Sure.
777.
Sure. So if 7 is kind of a Hebrew concept of perfection, and then 777 is like the triple perfection, nothing's better than that. Obviously, we're talking about the holiness of God. Well, then 6 is almost a purposeful rejection of 7. And again, the logic is maybe not what we're accustomed to, but the idea is like 3 exists on its own, or 2, it's so far away, just like it's living its own life. But to say 6, well, why not just say 7? It's almost like you're doing it on purpose. And then 666, it's like, oh, you are overtly and purposefully setting yourself in opposition to 777. So we're getting this juxtaposition. St. Anne's is the natural. It's like a natural beauty. And then nice is industrial, bureaucratic, artificial. And we should have, even though they haven't done really anything bad, we should have that uncanny valley sense of uneasiness. So let's kind of get to that for a second into St. Anne's, because here it is juxtaposed with what the time we spent with Mark. Now we start talking with Jane, and she is led into a walled garden. And everything about St. Anne's, it makes her feel uneasy, but not in the same way I think we would feel uneasy about nice. Not about its artificiality, but almost like I'm not sure I belong. And that's a different kind of uneasiness, isn't it? Not wrong, but like just maybe I don't know how I fit. Um, my job places me in some very intimate and tender places with families. I've been around many bedsides of dying parishioners. You know, the family is gathered. A lifetime is being remembered, oftentimes with sorrow. And I'm not your blood, and I'm not your kin. And maybe I've only known you for a couple of years. Why am I there? And I mean, I'm not saying I don't know why I'm there, but there's sometimes a feeling like this is it. When I start every funeral about it being a solemn privilege. It is a solemn privilege to be welcomed into a family's most tender and intimate moments. Is there anything more than that, like saying goodbye to someone, a husband, a wife, a father, a child? And who am I that you would let me in? And I always try to take it very, very seriously, but I also try to take it very respectfully. And at any moment, if I was told, look, I think the family needs a moment, I excuse myself. Well, no, I'm the priest, by golly. They called me in to give last rites. And that's what, no. You know, this is such a privilege to be led into this moment. But I always want to have a very light grip and not impose on anything. And that's almost kind of how I feel. Like Jane is not fully comfortable there, but I don't think it's because she perceives it as being bad or wrong. I think she's wondering, do I fit in here? Is this a place that I'm supposed to be in? It almost feels too solemn or too natural or too beautiful. So we are now given a little revelation. So we're going to start, like the narrative is going to start accelerating. And this little section on 3, I think that's what it was, 3, we are given some very deep information about Jane that makes her extremely unhappy. And what, in a nutshell, what is this information? Because this is going to change everything.
Dreams mean something.
She is a visionary. She's having these dreams, the ones that we got way back when in chapter 1, the ones that she talked to Mother Dimble about, the guy who's getting the criminal, the guy getting his head screwed off, the old man they brought out of the ground speaking something like Spanish, and so on and so forth. All these things were very unsettling and very weird, and that she just thought were nightmares. Maybe these nightmares were a part of a psychological condition. I'm going to Miss Ironwood because she's going to be a therapist. She's going to help me feel better and control these things. But instead, the revelation is these dreams are real. You are actually seeing reality, even though you weren't physically there to see it. And that is not at all what she expected to hear. We've taken now a somewhat dramatic step into a different kind of story than we had in the first 2 chapters. You know, this slow burn about the young academic couple and them being kind of petty, and you almost want to smack them a little bit and say, stop being so self-centered and work this out. The boring internal politics of a small college. I mean, this is, and all of a sudden you're having prophetic dreams because it runs in your family. You're not here for these dreams to stop. As a matter of fact, if you tried to stop them, it might cause more harm than good. But you can either run, or these dreams are meaningful and potentially important. We can, maybe you need to be using these dreams to accomplish something good. We need your help. Well, is it going to help me feel better? Maybe not. But I'm not sure that's an option on the table. Your option is run and hide and make this worse, or fight. So these things that she's seen really do seem to correspond, to the point where she even had a little vision on the way in about the passage that she was going to read in the waiting room. All these little pieces starting to point to something more, something purposeful maybe. The question is, what is the purpose? And how do these individual pieces all work for that purpose? And Jane kind of hates this idea. Jane just wanted this to stop. Imagine going to the doctor with migraines or headaches, and the doctor says, well, actually, we can't give you anything to stop the migraines, and you shouldn't try to stop it. The migraines are actually this other very important thing. Like, wait, what? I didn't come in here to be a part of anything. I came in here for you to fix me. Well, we can't fix something that's not wrong. And this is something that the Siren repeats a couple of times. You could go somewhere, you go find a psychotherapist, and they're gonna happily tell you that you're sick, and they're gonna try to make you well. The problem is you're not sick. These are not delusions. These are not figments of a fertile imagination or something biochemically wrong with you that needs to be adjusted. This is basically a spiritual gift. And the world is coming to a point where I think we need the use of your spiritual gift. Will you do it? So we've now gone back and forth a couple of times. We spent a little more time with Mark in this chapter, but with each little subsection, we flashed back and forth between the two locations, between the two protagonists, between their two paths and their two stories. And we are left with Jane, who I would describe her as scared, but I would also describe her as a little resentful. I think she's got a real sense of, this isn't fair. I didn't ask for any of this. Why me? Be a part of something? I don't want to be a part of something. I just don't want to feel so strange or so weird or so upset. And you're telling me that's not even an option? You're telling me that there's like a fight between good and evil. I didn't sign up for any of this stuff. And I think she feels a little... Now, she describes it in a way, and again, a woman, I cannot answer to her sense of personal loss that she says all women kind of have when they get married, where they sort of set things aside. I can't speak in those terms, but I can speak in a man's terms. There was stuff I set aside in order to be married. You've got some possibilities and potentialities out there. We were married young. And there were a lot of things, my life could have gone this way or this way or this way or this way. There's some things I might have accomplished or done, or I had friends who were doing some kind of once in a lifetime sort of things. And I've encouraged people like, oh, okay, look, that something like that, you got to do it while you're young. Oh, I was just talking to a high school senior who's real interested in a particular college, between another, like I have to decide between these two, and one of them is going to give the opportunity for studying abroad, and I think I'm interested. It's like, studying abroad is it's an amazing opportunity. You have to do it young. If that's something that's interesting to you, do it as soon as you can. Because if you don't take that opportunity up soon, well, you might not get it again. or it may be way harder to do. I went to seminary in what was considered extremely young. Our diocese had not sent, you get sponsored, you get sent to seminary. You have to go through this long process and get approved and meetings and all sorts of jazz. And you become a postulant, and the diocese sends you to go to seminary. And all that, the thought is, no one is called to ordination on their own, but it's a work of the community. The body lifts you up for service. Okay, I get it. But the Diocese of Central Florida had not sent anyone to seminary directly out of college in over 30 years. And so their entire process was built towards someone who was going to seminary as a second or third career option. We literally had scripts at these meetings so I could get approval, where the scripts assumed that I was like in my 40s or 50s. Like, I remember one of them was drawing a line diagram of ups and downs in your life by decade. And I'm like, yeah, I was 20. I was 20 when I started the process, because I was like finishing college, and I assumed you could, and just like, so I went to school, not then, we actually went a few years later after we got married, but like my classmates were in their 40s and 50s. We were living in married housing on campus while Lula finished her degree and then finished her master's. And then we went up there and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on campus. And I was pretty close to the mindset of taking tests and reading books and writing papers and stuff like that. And I had in my class a bunch of attorneys in their 40s who moved away from a home or sold it, who brought children, who closed practices, who hadn't read a textbook and written a paper in 20 years. And just the gulf of experience at that point of the understanding was so different. And how hard it was for them to kind of get back into the swing of things. That for me was no big deal. Like, I had no, I wasn't selling a house. I just wrote a paper last week. All this stuff just seemed very matter of fact to me. And there were things that they had to relearn. And there were things that were like, this was a tough decision to make. We almost didn't do this because we had to give up so much to come. So, the younger you are, the more openness and possibilities and potentialities there are. And we make certain decisions in life that then close a bunch of doors, for good or for bad. There are things that once Lula and I decided to get married, I was never going to do. But the thought is, it's worth it. You got to do something at some point anyway. But you can't do everything. And sometimes our decisions come at a crossroad. And you have to pick to the left or to the right, knowing that the other option now won't be done. I don't have the time to do it anymore. I don't have the ability to do it anymore. It would be too difficult to start over, whatever it is. And sometimes there can be a little bit of resentment. We like to have our cake and eat it too, but you have to pick one or the other sometimes. Sometimes it's not just the fact that we find ourselves at crossroads. It feels a little unfair. Why does this have to be a crossroad? Why can't I go both? Why can't I do both? Or why do I have to choose now? And this, I think, is where she is starting to struggle with her temptations. Think about everything I've already had to give up. Do I want to give up more? Entangled is the word that she uses. I don't want to be entangled. I've already given up enough of my dreams, enough of my independence. And she even says this is why she didn't want to have a baby, and hopefully not have a baby for a long time. Because how entangled, you can't get more entangled than that, having this child grow inside of your own body, right? And then how many things are you going to have to give up? Not just during the pregnancy, but by taking on an actual family and a dependent and somebody, doesn't that, you're not going to just drop everything and go to Spain for the weekend. And so now she's finding herself at a crossroad that she never expected, and I think is both scared and maybe a little resentful that she has to make a choice at all. What else? So we have taken a step into the fantastical. We've talked about this being a fairy tale, and a fairy tale starts off with the mundane and then slowly starts to reveal that there's an unseen world all around the mundane. And we've now taken our very first step, because you've talked about somebody having prophetic visions. Well, that's not the mundane world anymore. So what will be the next step to reveal what is happening all around us that we haven't yet seen? And that's where these next chapters are headed. Okay, we good? All right, thank you very much.